All right, welcome to the IKFK switch tutorial. So in this tutorial, we're going to be setting up this setup. This is a very simple setup meant really for beginning riggers. So we've got a control here that is our left wrist IK control. And of course, it's going to function just like we would expect with our wonderful IK movement. And then also with a very simple twist setup on the forearm. So see, we got our forearm control here. That's just basically very simply constrained between our elbow and our wrist to give us some nice fall off with that. So that's our IK control, and then we've got our switch control right here, and we just turn that IK switch to off, and now that gives us our FK controls. And then our arm is going to move just as we would expect in a wonderful FK. So, and you could switch back and forth. Just like that. So if you don't, if you're looking for something a little more complicated, again, this is just for beginners. So it's not going to be covering any sort of snapping between the two. This is really just a very simple and basic switch. So it is nice to be able to choose times when you want to go in and animate with just your IK. When a character is planting their hand on a table or the ground or grabbing onto something, and you want to keep that secure, that's great for IK. And when they're just walking around or moving or swinging their arms around, it's really nice to work in FK because you get really great arcs through it just very naturally. Whereas with IK, you have to really plot out all your movements to get a really nice arc moving. So this is the setup that we want to get. And so I'm just going to switch over to one that does not have this, and we'll get started. Okay, so this is our character here. It's got no controls or anything set up on it. You can see there's no constraints on any of our joints. I've got my joints for my skin joints have an underscore SK at the appended to the end of the name, and that's really going to be really helpful to make sure that I don't get things confused later on in this. So basically what we have to do with this is we're going to create two other joint chains. Okay, obviously these ones aren't skinned and have no effect, but those two joint chains we're going to use to parent constrain to each of these joints. And that is going to, and then we're going to be switching on and off the weight value of those parent constraints on our skin joints. And so if we have that switch turned to be on IK mode, then the IK joints are going to really be what's driving our rotation of our skin joints. And then when we switch back to FK mode, then it's going to be our FK joint chain. So we have to have three different joint chains. So what we're going to do first is we're just going to duplicate our joint chain, and to show that it's duplicated, it's appended on the number 1 at the end. Since there's no values on translate Y here, I'm going to move it down just so you can see. There we go. We've got a separate joint chain here. Now on this joint chain, we don't want this other joint. And if you have multiple joints in your arm setup that are skinned to it, that is fine. But we really only want our shoulder, our elbow, and our wrist joint. And everything else is just going to get in the way because we are working mainly with those joints as our main forms of deformation and movement. And so we really want to get rid of that forearm joint. So we'll just go up under skeleton and go down to remove joints. And that's going to get rid of that joint. And then we also aren't going to need any of these thumb or finger joints. So we're going to delete all of these. and just keep these. So it's really nice making sure that we have these duplicated exactly, because it's going to keep our same joint orientation and rotation order from our skin joints. And the better that they are mirrored, the nicer translation that there is between the rotation and positioning of these different joints and their relationship to each other. So now that we have these, we want to go through and differentiate this so that they all don't say that they're all the skinned ones. So under modify, you can go down to search and replace names, and we're just going to search for underscore SK, and we're going to replace that with underscore IK. We'll hit apply. Now we'll go through, and then we're just going to go in and get rid of that one. We don't need it anymore. It's got a separate name, so we don't have to worry about it matching the skin joint. So now that we have that, we're going to duplicate that. And we're going to do the same thing, go back to modify and search and replace names. And on this one, we're going to search for IK and replace it with FK. Hit apply and do the same thing, get rid of that one. And then if I move that one, now you see we've got our 3 different joint chains here. So I've moved them out like this simply so you could see that there are 3 different joint chains. It can be really, really hard to see that when they're on top of each other. But really, ideally, they're all going to be right on top of each other. We're not going to see them, and when we're done, we're going to be turning off these other joint chains so that we're not allowing our animators to accidentally select them or use them. That's certainly not anything that we really want. So I know that my translate Y was at 0, so I'm going to set these both back to 0. Yay! Okay, so we have these 3 joint chains. We can see them here in our outliner. And hit F in your outliner, and that will bring up and frame those joint chains. So here's our IK, here's our FK, and here's our skinned version. So they all have unique names, except for this left wrist end. We'll make sure we append IK on the end of that. And we'll do the same for the FK. Okay, all right. That way all names are unique. We won't be worried about anything getting confused there. And then, of course, we have just our normal joint chain here. So our skin joints here. So what we need to do is we need controls for our FK, and we need our control for our IK, and then we're going to have a separate control that's going to be outside of both of those controls. That is going to be our switch. So to set those up really quick, we are going to just create a NURB circle. We're going to group that to itself. And we're going to name both of these. We'll start with our FK. So our left shoulder FK control underscore C, and this is the group. So GRP. And then we can cheat and just copy that. And then select the actual curve and rename that. Now we have that. Okay, so we can see that here. Here's that nice control that we made. And now we want this to mirror the rotation order of our shoulder and elbow and our wrist. And so to do that, we're going to use a little cheat here. And we're going to select one of our joints. Doesn't matter which one. Our left shoulder skin joint is perfectly fine. And then we're going to come into our outliner and make sure that we select that parent group of that control that we just made. So control select that. Then we're going to come up and we're actually going to do a parent constraint where we're going to go into the option box and make sure that we turn off maintain offset. So now when we apply this, it's going to snap that group and orient it to that joint that we had selected. So, and now all we're simply going to do is we're going to delete that parent constraint. So the parent constraint for that group is just right underneath it now as a child. So we just select that and hit delete. And now we've got a control that is set and oriented correctly to that bone. So we are going to do the same thing with for the elbow and the wrist. And so I'm going to pause this and just quickly set those up so you don't have to sit and watch. It's just a repeat of each of those, just selecting the elbow and the control group and snapping those each into place. Okay, so I've got those other controls set up just the same way that I did the other one. And then I've changed their color blue. You can do that just by selecting on your control and going into your attribute editor, and under the shape node, you can go down to object display and then down under drawing overrides and select enable overrides. And then that will give you the option to change the color of your control. So for anything on the left side, we use blue. Anything on the right side, we use red. So it's a good general rule of thumb, pretty common throughout rigging circles. So, okay, so we've got those. Obviously, the orientation of our controls maybe not quite right. So we'll select all of our controls, go into component mode, and then select all of our control points on that, and then we're going to rotate this. So going into our rotate tool, and if we go into our rotate settings, we want to make sure we turn our step snap to absolute, and we're just going to rotate it and keep it on a 45 step. And then we want to make sure that in this we are using the object. Here we go. So right now it's selecting all this. If you press and hold your E key and then press and hold your right click, then you can go down and you can select this rotate object center. So now it's going to rotate from each of the center points of those objects. We're just going to rotate like that 2 times over, and then we're going to scale these all down. Again, we want to do the same thing. You press and hold R, and then press and hold your left click. Then you can go in and select the scale object center. And now it's going to do the same thing. It's going to scale from that point. Do that. And maybe deselect these and make the wrist just a little bit smaller. And then we'll go back into and maybe just select our shoulder one and just move it out a little bit so we can access it and see it. Maybe scale it a tiny bit bigger. Yeah. Okay, so these are all set up now. We need to go in and make sure that they're parented so that they're going to act and behave like we want them to. So we're going to go in and press up to make sure we've selected its parent, and then shift select the control, and we'll hit P to parent that. And then we'll select the elbow control and hit our up arrow key to select our parent group. And then we're going to shift select our shoulder control and hit P for parent. And then we're going to take our shoulder control and pick walk up, pressing up and getting to that top group. And then shift selecting our clavicle control and hitting P to parent that. So now all these controls are going to follow along together. So yeah, right now none of our controls are doing anything, and that is fine and okay. The next thing we want to do is we're actually going to duplicate this control to get the control for our IK. So we'll select this and go up, and we're just going to duplicate that whole group. And we're just going to rename this to the IK. And we'll change that null to just be group. And then do the same thing for the actual control. Change that to left wrist IK. Okay, so now that we have that, I'm going to go into the history on that nerve circle, and I'm going to change the degree over to linear. Oh, and I broke it. Maybe I won't be doing that. So actually, I'll go in, I'll select these, and just to make our control a little bit different, look a little bit different, I will go in and just select every other vert or control point, excuse me. And we'll scale those out. Give us a more of a square control there as opposed to the round control. And that gives us just a little bit of visual difference so we know right away, hey, this control is different. All right, so we've got all these controls. Obviously, nothing is happening right now and nothing is working. And that is fine. The last control that we want, we're just going to create a nerve circle. And we're just going to move this. I'm just going to snap that up to the wrist. And then I'll rotate it over and around. And then on the tool settings, take off that snap. Turn that off and just kind of line this up. I'm not too worried about this lining up with anything or putting any values on this because this is just going to be a switch. We're eventually going to be locking and hiding all of these controls because we don't need it to actually move anything with translate or rotate. Excuse me. So from here, we'll scale this down. We'll move it up. Just like that. And then we're going to name this our IK FK switch control. There's that. And then actually we want this to always follow our skin joint no matter what. So we'll select our skin joint for our wrist, and then we'll shift select that IKFK switch. We're going to go in and we're going to constrain that. So we'll do a parent constrain, and we'll turn our maintain offset back on. We'll hit apply, and now wherever this wrist moves, that switch is going to move with us. So we'll always know where our switch control is. It's always going to be right next to the hand. And then we're going to go in. We don't need these channels anymore. So we're going to go in and we're going to select lock and hide by right-clicking on those channels and highlighting them all. And now we have nothing on it. Okay. So we'll go into edit and we'll add attribute. And we're going to add the IK switch, and we're going to make this a boolean. So it's on or off. We'll hit add and close that. So here's our switch control there, and we've got all of our other controls. So we're now ready to make all of our connections. So I'm going to pull up the outliner. And we will select this. Oh, the one thing that I forgot to do, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, is this control, because I duplicated after it was parented, is still a child of the elbow FK control. So if I move that, they both move. And we don't want that functionality right now, or at all. So we're going to go up, select its parent group, and hit I renamed the wrong group. No worries, we'll change that to FK. And then we'll change our other group back to the IK. Okay. All right, so with that selected, we can hit Shift P and unparent that. And then we can, with that selected, we can shift select our clavicle control and hit P for parent. So now that control will follow the clavicle, will be a child of the clavicle. All right, so now we need to start making all of our connections. So we're going to go ahead and find all of our FK controls and our IK controls. So if you wanted to, you could turn off all the other ones that you're working with. So we can go to our left shoulder, skin joints, and control click our left shoulder IK and just turn their visibility to 0. And now we're just working with our IK. So with those selected, we'll select our control, shift select our shoulder, and we'll just do an orient constraint. So just locking out those rotations of the joints. So we're going to do the same thing. So select our control, shift select the elbow. We'll hit G to repeat the last function. And we'll do the same thing with our wrist. Hit G. So now we'll see these are actually rotating our joints. Perfect. Yay. Okay. With that set up, now we need to set up our IK control. So we're going to go in. We will turn off our FK 0, and then we're going to come back in to our outliner, find that shoulder IK joint, and turn it back on. So now we're working with our IK. So with this, we need to create our IK constraint. So under rigging, we'll select our IK control, and then just make sure that we're on a rotate plane solver. And we'll select our shoulder, and then select the wrist. So that will give us that, and then we're going to make one more constraint, or one more IK. We're going to call this one left IK arm. And we're going to make one more, and going from our wrist joint to this wrist end joint. So, and what this is going to do is it's going to help us lock down the rotation of the wrist and give control back to our IK control there. So we're going to name that left IK wrist. And we're going to take both of these controls, select both of them, and then shift select our IK control. And we're just going to hit P to parent those under there. And now our IK control will have total control over that. Yay. And then you'll notice, see, it's locking out that rotation. So it's keeping it to be parallel with our control because we're not actually rotating that. Without that other IK, you could still do it, but what it's going to do is that it's going to leave the wrist rotating or not rotating, and so it's going to follow that chain down, and it doesn't quite match up very nicely with our control. And we like to look like our control is actually in control. Okay, so we'll move that back to 0 and go in. We don't need to see these anymore, so we can hide their visibility. And now we need these joint chains to control our skinned joint chain. So in our outliner, we're going to go ahead and we're going to be creating an orient constraint between our IK and FK joints and our skin joints here. Okay, and we're going to be ignoring that forearm joint in the skin joint chain. So we will select our FK shoulder, and then we'll control select our IK shoulder, and then last we'll control select our skin shoulder there, and we're going to do an orient constraint just like that. And now we're going to do the same thing with the elbow. So FK elbow, IK elbow, and skin elbow. We'll create that, and now we're going to do it one more time with our wrist. So FK wrist, IK wrist, and skinned wrist. Okay, so now we've got that. You'll notice on each of those it's going to make these weight values right here, and this is where our switch is going to come in. So we're going to go in and we're going to control when this one is on, this one's going to be off. When this value is on, this one's going to be off. So, and that's what's going to be controlling it, and we're going to be setting up some connections and then using a reverse node to give us a connection for the other way. So with those, right now, if we were to move any of our controls around, you'll see the arm is actually in between both, right? Because right now, the constraint is having control, having 100% influence from both of them. So it's going to be right in the middle. It's basically a 50% influence from our FK and our IK. So, and we are going to be changing that. So we'll move that back. And now we're going to be going in and we're going to select our IK switch control. And we're going to go up to Windows, General Editors, Connection Editor. And that will automatically populate on the left side. And then we're going to go in and we're going to be selecting that skin joint. So actually need the outliner again so I can view those. Go in, select that. We'll hit F to frame it in the outliner. And there we go. Okay, so we want our skin joints. So just to look at them, I'm going to turn off the IK and turn back on our skin joints. One. And if we open these all up, we're going to start seeing all of those orient constraints that we created. So our wrist, our elbow, and our shoulder. And we want to put each of those in on the right side. So we're going to scroll down in our connection editor down to the bottom, and there's our attribute that we added, the IK switch. And then we're going to start with the shoulder. Reload that. And then if we scroll down, it's going to show us the weight values that we have with our shoulder. So we've set up our switch control here to say IK switch. So if this is on, then we're going to say that our IK is on. And when it is off, then we're saying our FK is on. And so we want to have control. This will be a direct connection between the weight of the IK. So this guy right here, this left shoulder IK weight 1. So we're going to select that to give that control. And then we're going to go into our next one. Our elbow orient constraint. Reload that. And we're going to do the same thing. Select that IK. And then we're going to go into our wrist orient constraint and reload that. And same thing. IK switch will control that left wrist IK weight right there. So now, since that was set to off, we've already got that kind of working. So now we've given full control over to our FK, but we're only halfway there. Now we need to get the value to do the same thing for our IK. So if we switch this, say, hey, we want this on, so we haven't set anything up to control the weight of the other, it's not really working how we want it to. Yeah, so these are still on, but we need them to be off. Okay. And the last thing that we want to do is that if our switch is off, if our IK is off, then we will want our control to be off. So this control does nothing for us right now. We've eliminated its functionality until we make that switch. We turn it back on. So we're going to now pipe in our left wrist IK. And we're going to, again, keep it on the IK switch from our switch control. And we're going to go up and we're going to tie that to the visibility of this control. So now it's turned off. And then when we turn it back on, it's going to turn that on automatically. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want the exact opposite to happen on our FK controls and our FK constraints. And so in order to do that, we're going to go into our node editor. So actually with our outliner selected, we're going to select each of those orient constraints, our shoulder, elbow, and wrist, and go up to Window, Node Editor, and there they are. Populated in for us, which is great. And I'll line those up. So again, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using a node, a utility node that Maya has called the reverse node. And this basically is going to do what you think it's going to do. It's going to reverse the value that we put into it. And so we're going to feed it this value from our IKFK switch. So we're going to add that to our graph right here. So we can see our connections here already. And we're going to be making another set of connections through a reverse node. So to find your utility node, you just can toggle the create node pane on or off right here, and it is a utility node. You can scroll down and you can find it right here. Here's our reverse node. shows up like this. Or if you don't want to go through all that, you can just hit Tab anywhere in your node editor and then start typing in the name of your node. And that will pop in, and you hit Enter on your keyboard, and that will pop up. Okay, and now if we click on here, we need to open this up. Just by clicking this open, it will find it. Other attributes for us. So now we want this IK switch to come in to our reverse node. We're going to open this up a little bit more so that we can get to the input. And we're going to take that IK switch over to the input X, just like that. And then we're going to take our output X and we're going to start tying it into here. So we can do this through here or our connection editor. Open that up. Okay, so here's the weights that we're trying to get to right here. So we want the output right here of our X value to go into that FK control. We'll open up by double clicking to get to all of its connection points, and we'll do the same thing. We're going to take that output X and we're going to drag it to the FK. And one more. So output X goes over to our FK weight control on that orient constraint. So now those are all set up. And the only thing that we need to do now is do that same connection to, and we can just do this on the root control for our visibility. So we're going to add our shoulder control here. We'll pull that over, and then we're going to take again that same output X, and we're going to connect it to our visibility. So we've made our connection there. We see the little yellow there that tells us we've made the connection. And that's it. We're done with the node editor. We can rename our reverse node to be our left arm IK switch underscore RVS for reverse. There we go. And we will close that. So now we've got our switch set up. So right now we've got our switch here set to off, so the IK is off, and we have full control on our rotation of our arm, and then we can select our switch and turn that to on, and now we have control on our IK. We can move that around along with its rotation on the wrist. Zero that all back out. These back out. All right. So the last thing that we can do is if we have a twist set up here, we want these to be influenced according to the rotation of our joints. And so what we'll do, we've got, so obviously when we twist our hand here, we would expect some twisting to happen, right? Because this is actually two bones that are coming together and rotating around. And so the wrist joint is actually doesn't really bend that way. But those two bones are twisting around each other, and that creates that twist on our hand. And so we use a lot of times our forearm twist joint to help add to that so that it flows through the whole forearm from elbow to the wrist. And so what we're going to do, change this all back to 0, is we're going to, so what we need to do to get this to function properly and not have there be any sort of cycle offset that can happen and really give us undesired results is we actually need to go in and we're going to have our IK and FK elbow and wrist constrained to our forearm or our forearm joint will be constrained by those two different joint chains that we'll be switching on and off to give it that nice fall off and roll off that we would want and expect and to behave properly. So what we'll do is we will go in. So here is our left elbow IK and our wrist. So we're going to select our wrist, control select the IK, and then go down to our FK joints and do the same thing. Select our FK elbow and our FK wrist. And then we're going to shift select our skinned forearm. Then we're going to go up to constrain, and we're going to set up an orient constraint. And this, we just want it to affect the x-axis. So we'll select the x-axis and hit apply. And now both of those are going to have full effect on that. And what we're going to do is we're going to set that to the switch as well so that we can turn off when they're being influenced. So we'll go back in. We need to find that. And if we bring up, let's have all these extra windows open. So if we go back into our Windows node editor, go back in here. So here's this. We want both of these, and now we need that orient constraint that we just created on our forearm, which we'll find right here. And we're going to add this to our graph. There it is. And we're going to open that up by just clicking twice there so that we can get down to these weight values. So we've got 4 of them, 0, 1, 2, and 3. And what we're going to do is anywhere where it's the IK, it's just going to be a direct connection of our IK switch on our IK control. So we're going to plop that over, and we're going to find our first IK and plug that in. And then we're going to go find our other IK weight value and plug that in. And now we want our output X on a reverse switch to control the FK ones, just like we did with our other controls and orient constraints. So we'll select the output X, and we'll take it down to the first FK, and then select it again and click and drag that down to the second FK. All right, and then we're going to close that. And now we should get a nice fall off. So we're automatically rotating there, which is really nice. And then, of course, when we switch that, we should get it here too. So hard to get. I haven't set up anything to control our twist, like a pull vector or anything like that. So it can be hard to tell that is actually working, but it is functioning. That would be the next step to do, is to set up either a pull vector constraint or the no flipping elbow to get that to work, just like I had set up on the leg in the previous tutorial. So there you have it. So you have to kind of do it that way. Some people would go in and just take your skin joints. I did this not thinking. um, and you would select just your wrist and your elbow and constrain your forearm to both of those because you would think, oh, hey, they're both getting influenced by these. We already have that switch set up, but that would actually create a cycle, right? And that's where you have a child controlling a parent, and obviously the parent is controlling the child, and it gives you just really bad, undesired results, and that's not what we want. So you have to go through and set it up that way, and having that being constrained over to your IK and FK chains instead, and then using the switch on that. So, all right, there you have it. I hope that helps. Good luck.